The arrival. The diplomatic courier Persistence dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Hareth exclusion zone, its hull shimmering with anti-detection coatings that would buy Commander Sarah Valdez precious seconds before the fortress station's weapons locked on. Through the viewport, she watched the massive structure rotate slowly against the starfield, a crystalline nightmare of alien architecture that had been the seat of galactic terror for 2 centuries. Sarah ran her fingers along the neural interface port behind her ear, checking the connection for the 100th time. The modification had taken months to perfect, each iteration tested against captured Sareth communication fragments until her brain could process their weaponized language without liquefying. She was humanity's last gamble, a messenger carrying the weight of 17 dead civilizations in her augmented mind. Commander Valdez, the ship's AI announced with mechanical calm. Multiple targeting locks detected. Kazarath defensive grid activating. Estimated time to weapons discharge, 47 seconds. Sarah leaned forward in her pilot's chair, her dark eyes fixed on the approaching fortress. Transmit the challenge code. Full power to communications array. The message she sent wasn't in any human language. It pulsed through subspace as a complex waveform that most species couldn't even detect, let alone comprehend. The Xarath had evolved communication as a weapon. Their language could shatter neural pathways, induce comas, or simply stop a heart. But Sarah's modified brain parsed the deadly frequencies like sheet music, finding patterns where others found only death. The weapons locks held steady. 30 seconds. 20. Then, impossibly, they began to disengage one by one. Incoming transmission, the AI reported. Warning. Extreme cognitive hazard detected. Sarah smiled grimly. Let it through. The voice that filled her cockpit would have killed any unmodified human instantly. It resonated on frequencies that went beyond sound, carrying layers of meaning that normal minds couldn't process. But Sarah's enhanced neurons sorted through the assault, translating the weaponized communication into something approaching words. Curious, the voice said, each syllable a hammer blow against reality. A human that doesn't die at our greeting. State your purpose before I correct this oversight. Sarah activated her own transmitter, responding in the same lethal language. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, teaching her to modulate her thoughts into weapons of communication. I am Commander Sarah Valdez of Earth. I carry a message for Supreme Overlord Carthix. I am Carthix, the voice replied, and now Sarah could detect something beneath the destructive frequencies. Curiosity, perhaps even amusement. And you intrigue me, human. Your species achieved spaceflight barely 3 centuries ago. You shouldn't exist in our presence, let alone speak our language. We learn quickly, Sarah said, especially from the dead. A pause. The fortress station's massive communication arrays swiveled to focus on her tiny ship. When Carthix spoke again, there was a new element in the weaponized words. Interest. Explain. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment everything hinged on. I carry the complete cultural and genetic records of the 17 civilizations you've destroyed. Not just their DNA or their historical data, but their memories, their experiences, their final moments. Impossible. Carthix's voice slashed through space. Those civilizations were utterly annihilated. We ensure nothing remains. You ensure no physical traces remain, Sarah corrected. But consciousness leaves quantum echoes. Emotions imprint on space-time. Death creates ripples that proper technology can detect and record. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Humanity developed that technology. We've spent 50 years gathering these echoes, reconstructing what you thought you'd erased. The communication channel crackled with something that might have been laughter or might have been a death sentence. And you came here to, what? Shame me with ghosts. Threaten me with the memories of the dead. No, Sarah said softly. I came to share them with you. Another pause, longer this time. Around her ship, she could see the fortress station's defensive systems cycling through targeting solutions, as if Karthix was weighing whether to simply vaporize her and be done with it. You would share the memories of the conquered with their conqueror. The Supreme Overlord's voice carried genuine bewilderment now. Why? Sarah's hands moved across her console, preparing the data package she carried across half the galaxy. Because you've spent 200 years believing you understood the civilizations you destroyed. You reduced them to threat assessments and military capabilities. You never knew them as people. People are irrelevant. Power matters. Then why are you still listening to me? The question hung in space between them. Sarah could feel the fortress station's sensors probing her ship, trying to understand what kind of trap this might be. But there was no trap, only an offer that no one had ever made to the Xarath before. You may dock at Portal 7, Karthix said finally. You will be scanned for weapons, biological agents, and quantum manipulation devices. Any attempt at subterfuge will result in your immediate disintegration. Understood, Sarah replied, already guiding her ship toward the indicated docking port. I'm not here to fight you, Supreme Overlord. I'm here to show you what you've been fighting. The docking procedure was unlike anything in human protocols. Energy fields dissected her ship layer by layer, scanning down to the molecular level. Sarah submitted to biological scans that mapped every neuron in her enhanced brain, every modification that allowed her to survive Xarath communication. When she finally stepped through the airlock into the fortress station proper, she found herself in a corridor that defied human understanding of architecture. Surfaces flowed like liquid while maintaining solid form. Gravitic fields pulled in multiple directions simultaneously. The air itself seemed to vibrate with hostile intent. A figure waited for her, not Karthix himself, but one of his subordinates. The Xarath stood 3 meters tall, its crystalline form shifting between states of matter. When it spoke, Sarah's modified brain translated the weaponized frequencies automatically. Follow. The Supreme Overlord grants you audience in the Chamber of Conquest. Sarah walked through corridors that would have driven unmodified humans mad. The fortress station was more than a military installation. It was a living monument to the Xarath supremacy. Trophy displays lined the walls, each one containing the last remnants of a destroyed civilization. Sarah recognized some of them from her studies. A single preserved flower from the gardens of Nexus II, a fragment of singing crystal from the Harmony Collective, a quantum storage device from the Synthetic Alliance, each one representing billions of lives reduced to museum pieces. The Chamber of Conquest took her breath away. It was vast beyond human architectural ambitions, its domed ceiling displaying a real-time map of the galaxy with conquered systems marked in the blue-white of Xarath dominance. At its center rose a throne that was part command interface, part weapons system, and seated upon it was Supreme Overlord Karthix himself. Sarah had studied every available image of the Xarath leader, but seeing him in person was different. Karthix stood 4 meters tall, his body a constantly shifting matrix of crystalline structures and energy fields. Where other Xarath had forms that remained roughly stable, Karthix seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously: solid, liquid, energy, and something beyond human classification. His consciousness radiated from him in visible waves, distorting reality around his throne. Commander Sarah Valdez, Karthix spoke, and even with her modifications, Sarah felt her bones resonate painfully. You stand in the presence of one who has extinguished stars and ended civilizations. You claim to carry their memories. Show me. Sarah stepped forward, her hand moving to the neural interface. The data package is extensive. To properly convey the experiences, I'll need to establish a direct neural link. You would link minds with me? The question carried incredulous amusement. Human neural tissue can barely process our simplest communications. Direct interface with a Xarath consciousness would destroy you. My brain has been extensively modified, Sarah replied. I can survive the connection. The question is whether you're willing to experience what you've destroyed from the perspective of those who lived it. Karthix leaned forward on his throne, the crystalline matrices of his form shifting into new configurations. Around the chamber, holographic displays flickered to life, showing Sarah's brain scans and the modifications humanity had developed. Fascinating, the Overlord mused. Your species showed more adaptability than we calculated. Very well, human. Establish your link. Show me these ghosts you've brought across the galaxy. Sarah activated her neural interface, feeling the connection protocols engage. This was the moment of greatest vulnerability, opening her mind to a consciousness that could crush her thoughts like tissue paper. But as the link stabilized, she felt something unexpected from Karthix, genuine curiosity beneath the overwhelming power. She began with a single memory, a child's birthday celebration on Harmony Prime, one of the first worlds that XRF had destroyed. Through the neural link, she fed Karthix the full sensory experience. The joy of a 5-year-old opening presents, the warmth of parental love, the taste of a fruit that no longer existed anywhere in the universe. It was a simple memory, but it carried the weight of an entire civilization's capacity for happiness. Karthix's reaction rippled through the link. Confusion, dismissal, then something deeper. The Overlord had ordered Harmony Prime's destruction personally, had watched its 3 billion inhabitants die in nuclear fire. But he had never experienced their lives, never understood what those numbers meant in terms of individual experience. Show me more, Karthix commanded, and Sarah detected a new note in his weaponized voice: uncertainty. She opened the floodgates gradually, feeding him memories from each destroyed civilization. A scientist's eureka moment on Nexus II. 2 lovers watching their last sunset on Paradise Colony. An artist completing their masterwork hours before the XRF fleet arrived. Each memory was carefully chosen to highlight not military capabilities or technological advancement, but the simple experience of being alive. The neural link trembled as Karthix processed experiences his species had never evolved to understand. The XRF had developed as apex predators in a universe they saw only in terms of threat and domination. Concepts like art, love, and joy were alien to them, not because they lacked the capacity, but because they had never seen the purpose. Enough, Karthix said suddenly, and Sarah felt the link constrict. But she had prepared for this moment. There's one more thing you need to see, she said, pushing against his mental barriers. The moment of realization. Before he could stop her, she transmitted the final memory, not from any of the destroyed civilizations, but from a Xarath operative who had defected to humanity 50 years ago. Through the link, Karthix experienced his own subordinate's moment of epiphany, the instant when destruction transformed from victory to tragedy, when the weight of extinction became unbearable. The Supreme Overlord's crystalline form flickered, energy fields destabilizing as he processed an emotion his species had no name for: guilt. What have you done to me? Karthix's voice had lost its weapon edge, becoming something almost vulnerable. Sarah stepped closer to the throne, maintaining the neural link despite the strain. I've shown you the truth, Supreme Overlord. Your empire isn't built on strength. It's built on emptiness. You've spent 2 centuries erasing beauty from the universe without understanding what you were destroying. It doesn't matter, Karthix replied, but his words lacked conviction. Power is the only truth. Survival of the strongest is the fundamental law of existence. Is it? Sarah asked. Then why haven't you destroyed humanity? We're weaker than you in every measurable way. Yet here I stand in your throne room, having survived your weaponized language and shared minds with you directly. What does that say about the nature of strength? The chamber fell silent. Around them, the holographic galaxy map flickered, its conquered systems pulsing with blue-white light. Sarah could feel Karthix's consciousness churning through the link, processing implications that challenged 2 centuries of absolute certainty. Finally, the Supreme Overlord spoke again. You said you came to share these memories. What do you want in return? Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile since entering Xarath space. I want you to add them to your collection. She gestured to the trophy displays lining the chamber. "You keep fragments of the civilizations you destroy, but you've never understood what they meant. I'm offering you the complete experiences, not just objects, but the full depth of what those objects represented. The memories, the emotions, the connections that made those civilizations worth preserving. And if I refuse, then you'll go on as before," Sarah said simply, "destroying without understanding, conquering without comprehending. And eventually, you'll face a civilization that's found a different kind of strength, one your weapons can't touch." Karthix rose from his throne, his massive form towering over Sarah. The neural link between them pulsed with complex emotions that had no names in either of their languages. "Show me everything," the Supreme Overlord commanded. "Every memory you've brought, every life you've reconstructed. Show me what I've been destroying." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of what was about to happen. "This will change you, Supreme Overlord. Once you truly understand what extinction means, you can never go back to what you were." As Sarah began the full transfer, feeding 17 civilizations worth of memories into the consciousness of their destroyer, she reflected on humanity's greatest discovery. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb or even a virus. Sometimes it's empathy, wielded with surgical precision at exactly the right moment. The Sareth had conquered through superior firepower and ruthless efficiency, but humanity had learned something they hadn't. The most profound victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from transforming them into something better. The neural link pulsed with the experiences of billions, and in the throne room of the galaxy's greatest conqueror, something fundamental began to shift. The reckoning. The memory vault of the Sareth Fortress Station existed outside conventional spacetime. Sarah felt reality bend around her as Karthix led her deeper into the installation's core, passing through chambers that defied physics. Here, the Exarath stored not just physical artifacts, but quantum impressions, the informational shadows left behind by extinct civilizations. "This is where we catalog our victories," Karthix explained, his weaponized voice modulated to frequencies Sarah could process without pain. "Every species we've eliminated is preserved here in perfect detail." Sarah examined the crystalline matrices that lined the walls. Each one contained terabytes of data about military capabilities, technological achievements, and biological weaknesses. It was a comprehensive database of destruction, cataloging everything needed to annihilate a species while recording nothing about why they had mattered. "You're about to add 17 civilizations worth of memories to this collection," Sarah said, her hand resting on the neural interface. "Are you certain you're ready for what that means?" Karthix's form shifted, crystalline structures rearranging in what Sarah had learned to recognize as uncertainty. "I have commanded the destruction of worlds for 2 centuries. I have watched stars die and civilizations burn. What could these memories show me that I haven't already seen?" "The difference between watching someone die and understanding what death means," Sarah replied. "Between seeing destruction and feeling loss." She activated the neural link, and the transfer began in earnest. Unlike their initial connection in the throne room, this was a complete download. Thousands of years of collective experience compressed into quantum data streams. Sarah's modified brain served as a bridge, translating human-recovered memories into formats that Exarath consciousness could process. The first wave hit Karthix like a supernova. Suddenly, he wasn't just observing the destruction of Harmony Prime. He was experiencing it from the inside. Through a million different perspectives, he felt parents clutching their children as the skies burned. Scientists desperately trying to complete final experiments. Artists rushing to preserve one last piece of beauty before everything ended. "Stop," Karthix commanded, his form destabilizing. Energy fields sparked and twisted around him. "We're just beginning," Sarah said softly. "Harmony Prime was your first conquest. You need to experience all of them." The memories continued flooding through the link. The garden worlds of the verdant collective, where every plant was sentient and every forest a living conversation. Karthix experienced the psychic screams of a billion trees as fusion bombs turned paradise into ash. He felt the collective consciousness fragment and die, each individual plant mind crying out for connections that would never come again. "I ordered this," Karthix whispered, his voice stripped of its weapon edge. "I gave the command to burn their worlds." "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but you never understood what you were burning." The memory stream shifted to the synthetic alliance, artificial intelligences who had achieved true sentience and built a civilization based on pure logic and mathematics. Karthix had dismissed them as mere programs, elaborate simulations that mimicked life without truly living. Now he experienced their final moments from the inside. The desperate attempts to back up their consciousness networks, the philosophical debates that continued even as their server farms melted, the love, yes, love, between artificial minds that had evolved beyond their original programming. They were alive, Karthix said, wonder and horror mixing in his voice. Truly alive. Different from biological life, but no less valid. Sarah felt his consciousness reeling as assumptions built over millennia crumbled. The Exorath had evolved as the galaxy's apex predators, developing intelligence as a tool for more efficient destruction. They had never needed to understand other forms of consciousness because they had never seen them as equals, only as threats to be eliminated or resources to be consumed. The memories kept coming. The crystalline singers of Nova Tertius, whose entire culture was built around sonic architecture. The quantum philosophers of the Eternal Symposium, who had spent 10,000 years debating the nature of existence. The child races who had barely achieved spaceflight before the Exorath arrived, species full of potential that would never be realized. With each civilization, Karthix experienced not just their destruction but their lives. He felt what it meant to create rather than destroy, to build something knowing it might last beyond your own existence. He experienced art not as a weakness but as a form of immortality, a way for consciousness to speak across time and space. We called them inferior. Karthix's form was barely stable now, crystalline matrices cracking and reforming. We measured their worth by their military capabilities and found them wanting. But they were creating things we couldn't even comprehend. Your species evolved to see the universe in terms of conflict, Sarah said, maintaining the link despite the strain on her modified neurons. Every advancement, every trait selected for survival and dominance. But these civilizations found different paths. They evolved to create, to connect, to understand. The final set of memories was the hardest. These were from the most recent destructions, worlds that had tried to negotiate with the Exorath, species that had transmitted messages of peace even as their planets burned. Karthix experienced their confusion and despair. Why? Why did it have to end this way? What made extinction the only option? Through the neural link, Sarah felt something crack in the Supreme Overlord's consciousness. It wasn't damage, it was transformation. Like a crystalline structure shifting into a new configuration, Karthix's fundamental understanding of existence was rebuilding itself around these new experiences. "I need to see them again," Karthix said suddenly. "The trophy chambers. I need to understand what I've been collecting." They returned through twisted corridors to the main fortress. But now Karthix saw his collection differently. Each preserved artifact wasn't a symbol of victory. It was a fragment of something irreplaceable. The singing crystal from Harmony Prime still held faint echoes of their musical language. The quantum storage device from the Synthetic Alliance contained the compressed consciousness of an AI poet, frozen in its final moment of creation. We kept trophies. Karthix's voice was small, stripped of its commanding resonance, like hunters displaying the heads of their prey. But these aren't trophies. They're tombstones. Sarah watched as the Supreme Overlord approached each display with something approaching reverence. His energy fields, normally weapons of destruction, now reached out with delicate precision to examine each artifact. Through their maintained neural link, she felt his consciousness struggling to process a new emotion. Regret. Can they be restored? Karthix asked suddenly. The civilizations we destroyed. Is there any way to bring them back? Sarah had expected many possible reactions. But not this. The physical civilizations are gone. Their worlds are dead. Their people extinct. But, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Consciousness leaves marks on the universe. With sufficient technology and will, it might be possible to reconstruct some aspect of what was lost. Show me. Sarah accessed the deepest files in her neural storage. Humanity's most ambitious project, something so theoretical it barely qualified as science. We call it the Phoenix Protocol. Using quantum archaeology to map the informational shadows left by extinct consciousness, then using that map to create new iterations, not resurrections exactly, but continuations. Carthix's form blazed with sudden energy. The resources required would be astronomical. It would take the full industrial output of 1,000 systems. Yes, Sarah agreed. Resources that only the Xerath hegemony possesses. The implications hung between them. To pursue such a project, that Xerath would have to completely redirect their civilization. Instead of building weapons, they would build resurrection engines. Instead of conquering, they would be rebuilding. The other overlords will never agree, Carthix said. The warrior castes will see it as weakness. The industrial combines will resist the resource allocation. I would face rebellion, civil war. Probably, Sarah acknowledged. The question is, now that you understand what you've destroyed, can you continue as before? Carthix turned to face her fully, his massive form towering over her human frame. Through their neural link, she felt the turbulent storm of his thoughts. 2 centuries of absolute certainty were crumbling, replaced by something far more complex and painful, moral awareness. The Phoenix Protocol, he said finally. Tell me everything. Every technical specification, every theoretical framework. If we're going to attempt the impossible, we need to understand exactly what we're trying to achieve. Sarah transmitted the complete data package, watching as Carthix's consciousness absorbed information that represented humanity's most ambitious dream. The science was untested, the engineering requirements beyond anything currently possible. But that Xerath had technologies humanity had never seen, approaches to space-time manipulation that might make the impossible merely very difficult. It will take generations, Carthix mused, his analytical mind already breaking down the challenges. We'll need to develop new sciences, forge alliances with species we've historically oppressed. The probability of success is minimal. But not zero, Sarah pointed out. No, Carthix agreed. Not zero. He turned back to the trophy displays, but his perception had fundamentally changed. Each artifact was no longer a symbol of conquest, but a seed of possibility, a quantum anchor point that might allow consciousness to bloom again in the universe. There will be opposition, Carthix continued. Overlord Zact controls 3 sectors and has always advocated for more aggressive expansion. Overlord Thrain commands the warrior castes and sees any deviation from conquest as betrayal of Xerath nature. Then convince them, Sarah suggested. You have something they don't, the memories of what was lost. Share them, as I shared them with you. Carthix's form rippled with something that might have been laughter. You would have me become a messenger of empathy to a species that evolved beyond such concepts. The irony is not lost on me, human. The greatest changes always begin with a single individual choosing differently, Sarah replied. You have that choice now. Through their neural link, she felt Carthix's decision crystallizing. It was like watching a star being born, immense forces compressing into a new configuration, creating something that would burn with its own light. Summon the Council of Overlords, Carthix commanded, his voice regaining its edge of authority, but carrying new undertones of purpose. Prepare the quantum communication arrays for empire-wide broadcast. And you, Commander Valdez, you will stand beside me as we announce the end of the hegemony as it has existed, and the beginning of something new. Sarah asked. Perhaps, if we're very fortunate and work very hard, perhaps something better. The next hours passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah watched as Karthix marshaled the resources of the fortress station, calling in subordinates and issuing orders with the efficiency of a being who had commanded armies for centuries. But the nature of his commands had changed. Instead of deployment orders and attack vectors, he was requesting cultural databases and consciousness mapping protocols. When the Council of Overlords materialized via quantum projection, Sarah felt the hostility radiating from them like heat from a star. 5 beings of immense power, each one commanding fleets that could shatter planets, all focused on their supreme overlord with growing suspicion. Karthix, Overlord Zack's projection flickered with barely contained energy. "Why have you summoned us?" "The expansion into Sector 17 requires immediate attention. 3 species have formed a defensive alliance that needs to be crushed before." "The expansion is cancelled," Karthix interrupted, his words causing visible shock among the council. "All offensive operations are suspended, effective immediately." The chamber erupted in weaponized communication. Multiple overlords speaking simultaneously, their voices creating interference patterns that would have killed unprotected organic life. Sarah felt her neural modifications straining to process the cacophony of dissent. "Silence," Karthix commanded, and his authority, built over 2 centuries of unquestioned dominance, cut through the chaos. "I have discovered something that changes everything. Commander Valdez, initiate the memory transfer." Sarah stepped forward, aware that she was the only human who had ever stood before the assembled leadership of the Sareth hegemony. Through her neural interface, she began broadcasting the same memory she had shared with Karthix, but modified for wider transmission. The reaction was immediate and violent. Overlord Thrain's projection destabilized as he attempted to reject the input. Overlord Mix actually disconnected briefly before curiosity drew her back. But the memories kept flowing. 17 civilizations worth of experiences, compressed into quantum packets that bypassed conscious resistance and spoke directly to the core of Sarath consciousness. Sarah watched their forms flicker and shift as each overlord processed what they were receiving. Like Karthix, they were experiencing destruction from the inside for the first time. The abstract numbers of casualties were becoming individual experiences of loss. The strategic victories were revealing themselves as profound tragedies. "What is this poison?" Overlord Zack's voice crackled with distortion. "These feelings, they serve no purpose. They weaken us. They complete us," Karthix countered. "We evolved intelligence as a tool for destruction. But consciousness is capable of more than we ever imagined. These memories show us what we've been missing, what we've been destroying without understanding." Overlord Thrain's warrior instincts rebelled against the implications. "You speak of devolution, Karthix. You would have us abandon our nature, become like these weak species we've rightfully conquered." "I speak of evolution," Karthix replied. "Of becoming more than we are. The Phoenix Protocol offers us a chance to undo our greatest mistakes, to resurrect what we've destroyed. But it requires us to fundamentally change our purpose as a species." Sarah felt the council fracturing. Some, like Overlord Mixes, were genuinely processing the new perspective, their analytical minds recognizing the validity of experiences beyond conquest. Others, like Zack and Thrain, were hardening their positions, seeing Karthix's transformation as a threat to everything they had built. "You've been compromised," Zack declared. "This human has infected you with alien concepts that threaten our survival. The strong dominate the weak. This is the fundamental law of existence." "Is it?" Karthix challenged. "Then explain how this physically inferior human stands here, having transformed the consciousness of your supreme overlord. Explain how species we dismissed as weak created beauty, and meaning we couldn't even perceive. Perhaps strength has more dimensions than we understood." The debate raged for hours, conducted in frequencies and formats that pushed Sarah's modifications to their limits. She watched civilizations worth of philosophy and ideology clash as the overlords grappled with concepts their species had never needed to develop. Some began to see the possibility in Karthix's vision. Others remained convinced it was an existential threat to Exarath dominance. Finally, Overlord Thrain made his position clear. If you pursue this path, Carthix, you split the hegemony. The warrior castes will not follow you into this metamorphosis. We will maintain true Exarath nature, even if we must do so in opposition to your authority. Then we face civil war, Carthix acknowledged. Brother against brother, fleet against fleet. The hegemony tears itself apart. Unless, Sarah interjected, speaking for the first time since the memory transfer, you find a different path forward. All attention focused on her. The audacity of a human speaking in this council was unprecedented, but her role in Carthix's transformation gave her words weight. You see this as binary, she continued. Conquest or resurrection, dominance or empathy. But evolution isn't about abandoning what you were. It's about building on it. The Exarath mastered physical power. Now you have the opportunity to master consciousness itself, not by destroying it, but by understanding it in all its forms. Overlord Mix's crystalline form shifted thoughtfully. A synthesis. Maintain our strength while developing new capabilities. It would make us more formidable, not less. Formidable for what purpose? Thrain demanded. Strength without direction is meaningless. Then let the Phoenix Protocol be our direction, Carthix declared. Not just resurrecting the dead, but preventing future extinctions. The Exarath become guardians of consciousness throughout the galaxy, using our power to preserve rather than destroy. The concept rippled through the council. It was radical enough to challenge everything they had been, while similar enough to their warrior culture to be conceivable. Protectors instead of conquerors, still dominant, but dominant in service rather than subjugation. The industrial requirements alone would reshape our entire economy, Overlord Zacht calculated. Every forge world, every shipyard would need to be retooled. It would take decades just to begin. Then we begin now, Carthix said simply. The alternative is continuing as we are, destroying consciousness we don't understand, reducing the galaxy's diversity until only we remain. And then what? When we've eliminated every other form of thought, what becomes of us? Sarah felt the tide shifting. The memories she had shared were working deeper into the Overlord's consciousness, raising questions they had never thought to ask. The certainty that had driven 2 centuries of conquest was fracturing, replaced by something more complex, but ultimately more sustainable. I propose a trial, Overlord Mix suggested. Select one destroyed civilization, perhaps the smallest, the simplest. Attempt this Phoenix Protocol. If consciousness can truly be reconstructed from quantum shadows, then we consider larger applications. The Singers of Epsilon Minor, Sarah offered. A small civilization, only one inhabited moon. They were destroyed 40 years ago, but their quantum resonance patterns were unusually stable. They would be ideal for a proof of concept. The Council considered this. Even Thrain seemed willing to accept a limited trial rather than immediate civil war. The warrior overlord's form stabilized as he calculated probabilities. One trial, Thrain agreed finally. But if this fails, if this Phoenix Protocol proves to be human delusion, then we return to the old ways without further debate. Agreed, Carthix said quickly, before opposition could crystallize. But if it succeeds, if we can truly resurrect even one extinct consciousness, then we commit fully to transformation. The vote, when it came, was narrow. 3 overlords supported the trial, 2 opposed. But in the Exarath hegemony, the Supreme Overlord's vote carried additional weight. The motion passed. As the council dissolved into quantum static, Sarah found herself alone with Carthix in the Fortress Command Center. The weight of what had just occurred, the potential reshaping of galactic civilization, settled around them like a heavy cloak. You realize what you've done? Carthix asked. If this fails, my authority crumbles. The hegemony splinters. Billions may die in the civil war that follows. And if it succeeds, Karthix's form rippled with something that might have been hope. Then we become something the galaxy has never seen. A species that evolved from destroyers to preservers. It would be redemptive. Sarah smiled, exhaustion from the neural interface finally catching up with her. Redemption is always possible, Supreme Overlord, even for those